Hello, I'm Greg Levine. I'm managing editor at Firedog Lake, and this is the party line for February 4th, 2011. And in spite of my stark surroundings, I am not in hiding in some Cairo hotel room. Not at all, and I certainly don't want to make light of that. But just because I'm not in Cairo doesn't mean I, like most of you out there, don't want to talk about Egypt. The thing is, believe it or not, I'm not coming to you live right now. So I'm afraid to talk too much about Egypt because honestly, by the time you see this, things will probably be very different. But there are probably a few things we can talk about because as of right now, crowds are amassing in Tahrir Square, and there's lots of buzz on the internet and on the BBC and on the broadcast media about a deal that's trying to be worked out between the Obama administration and the powers that be in Egypt, be that Mubarak himself or the newly minted vice president Omar Suleiman, or perhaps military leaders like the leader of the Air Force. The idea being that Mubarak would step down right away, would be replaced by the vice president Suleiman as a caretaker, and that negotiations would begin on some sort of reform that would ensure a free and fair, I love those terms, free and fair election in September. And those negotiations theoretically would include groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood, and I would assume somebody who would be called a leader of the January 25th movement as well. Lots of problems with the story, which, you know, it's very possible that all of this is happening, but the question is, on what level is it happening? I am sure, for instance, that the United States administration would love to see some sort of transitional move here, would love to see Mubarak out, would love to see violence averted for very good and humanistic reasons as well as very self-interested ones. But I'm also pretty sure that the Egyptian military and certainly Mubarak and Suleiman have very little interest in negotiating real reforms with certainly the Muslim Brotherhood or other leaders of other opposition movements for that matter. So the question is, the administration can leak all it wants about its moves behind the scenes, can also talk very publicly about the need for there to be an Egyptian solution. But the question in the end is, what's really going to happen when push comes to shove? What will the Egyptians actually agree to? This is not to say the United States doesn't have a hand to play here. Basically, it's very easy, I think, to look the military in the eye and tell them that pretty much every toy they have to play with was bought, paid for, and to a large extent manufactured in the United States. Although, interesting note, tanks, those Abrams tanks, which are U.S. tanks that you see around Tahrir Square on television, are mostly assembled in Egypt because we give them so many of them. It's better for us to ship them the spare parts and let them assemble them themselves. Most of you probably know by now that Egypt receives something like $1.3 billion annually in United States military aid. And it seems to me like that's a really large chip to put on the table when you're negotiating with them about what you might want to see between now and September. That said, sadly, it seems like Egypt has a chip or two as well. And one of the obvious chips is, of course, that they say that they are a bulwark for stability in the Middle East, one of the few countries in the region that's willing to make peace, a stable peace with Israel. But, of course, the other, frankly, bigger chip, perhaps, right now would be they say, well, if you don't want to give us money for our military, we might have to close down your rendition sites, or at least talk much louder about them. You see, because the problem is the United States has subcontracted with Egypt to do a lot of our torturing for us, and that is the sad truth of the matter. That's unfortunately the Egyptian hand to play in this situation. So who knows? By the time you're seeing this, maybe a lot of that did or didn't come to pass, or has been exposed or debunked. Of course, I hope for a day of peaceful demonstrations and a quick and peaceful resolution that includes some move towards reform and eventually representation by someone other than a military dictator there in Egypt. That's obviously the big story, but there's actually a little something else that I want to talk about, and that is the world's oldest profession, and that, of course, would be lobbying. This is I don't usually do a lot of work with the National Enquirer here, but they ran on Thursday, big story. Sex scandal, House Speaker John Boehner involved with two women, according to the Enquirer. Actually, though, you know, the story that they mostly write about is a not very interesting 1997 tryst between the Speaker and a press aide to a former congressman that apparently was interrupted because when they snuck off into a room, there were two other people already making out in the bed. The more important story, one that's been talked about more by Mike Stark, who actually is featured here in the Enquirer, which is pretty amusing to me anyway, is the link between Boehner and a current link between Boehner and a Capitol Hill lobbyist who works for the printing industry. This is not just in the Enquirer, but has been the buzz around Washington for a long time. It's an ongoing relationship between a lobbyist who's reportedly paid something like $350,000 a year to sleep with John Boehner. I mean, maybe I don't want to sell her short. She probably does a lot more than that. And honestly, I don't really care that they're sleeping together. It's not really important to me. Sex scandals, not very interesting to me. On a lot of levels, not very interesting to me. I mean, I care about the hypocrisy. I care about the family values types lording it over the rest of us and using it as an election issue when, you know, behind the scenes they're doing to their mistresses what they'd be doing to the country if they got elected. But actually, I think what's much more interesting here is the idea that lobbying on Capitol Hill has become about selling sex. I mean, or about pushing sex in exchange for favors. I mean, it's one thing, an illegal thing, to exchange cash for favors, but perhaps slightly less illegal to have an affair and also see your legislative agenda pushed. And you just sort of have to start to wonder if lobbying firms are actually thinking about this angle. I mean, it's not that long ago that the New York Times, who apparently is working on the Boehner story as well, but back in 2008 was pushing the story about John McCain and lobbyist Vicky Eisman. Now, the New York Times did a really bad job of rolling that story out, and it was the middle of the primaries, and the story was effectively killed by the McCain campaign, but never really denied. Not in a way that I was convinced of anyway. So while those are only two examples, I'm often fond of pointing out that you need only 2 points to draw a line. And it seems to me we should start to think about whether there is an idea on Capitol Hill that you can trade sex, where we used to just trade campaign contributions for political favors. Yes, seamy, sordid, but really surprising? No. And when it comes to surprising, I'm going to circle right back to Egypt for my final point, which is that with all of this happening today, just in fact an hour ago, watching Al Jazeera, I heard the United States again uttering this idea that what is happening over the last 2 weeks is surprising, that in fact they use the term, you know, no one could have anticipated. Now, I know that most people hear that and they think back to Condoleezza Rice. No one could have anticipated, no one could have predicted that terrorists would fly planes into buildings. And we know how that was a bit absurd. But I'm thinking actually when I hear that of something further back, which was the collapse of Yugoslavia. And the talk at the time back then that no one could have predicted. And that, of course, was ridiculous to me because I remember that when Marshal Tito died, everyone expected Yugoslavia to spin apart within a year. The fact that it took 10 years said to me that we should have had like 10 years of planning going on for what to do when that happened. Of course, what happened when it started to spin apart was horrible, and you have the massacres and the eventual U.S. involvement in a war in Bosnia. But like back to Egypt now, and again we're hearing this, and it seems to me that I can remember back when Mubarak took over right after the assassination of Sadat, and people saying that Egypt was a powder keg and that Egypt could boil over at any minute, and that's even longer ago. That happened when I was in college. That's longer ago than I want to admit. And the idea that we haven't been planning ever since for what to do when the military finally lost its hold on Egypt is mind-boggling to me. I mean, really staggering. There should be volumes of gaming and planning in the State Department, in the Department of Defense, and inside the White House and the National Security Council. We should automatically pretty much know what to do in situations like this because everyone could have foreseen it. And that, I think, is the party line for this Friday, February 4th. Coming up this weekend on Firedog Lake, we have 2 book salons, as usual. They happen at 5 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday, we've got The People Reloaded, the Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future, which, excellent timing for that book. And that's going to be Danny Postel and Nader Hashemi, who wrote the book, and the chat will be hosted by Kelly Nicknejad. On Sunday, The Whistleblower, Sex Trafficking, Military Contractors, and One Woman's Fight for Justice. That's a book by Catherine Bolkovec, and it's going to be hosted, the chat's going to be hosted by RJ Hillhouse. And I hope you can join us for both of those, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks.